Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to KPFT Houston. I'm Chris Hensley. The time is now 11 a.m. We've got a great show lined up for you today. You know, we talk about money each and every episode in some way, your finances and how people deal with their finances, how they have relationships with money. But it is often when people face a crisis like a sudden death of a loved one or other unpredicted events that relationship may change. We are talking today with Kira Nurieli. She is with Harmony Strategies, who is a mediation company who also does conflict resolution in the workplace through human resources training development as well. So stay tuned. Keep listening. We will do a deep dive into this topic. But if you are a longtime listener, you know we always use just the first few minutes of the show to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Houston and the Gulf Coast area when it comes to financial literacy. So we have just two calendar events for you. On the 18th, at the United Way building at 2 p.m. This is off of 50 Waugh Drive. We are having the Houston Money Week Partners Meeting. So as you know, if you've listened to the show before, April of each and every year is Financial Literacy Month. Houston Money Week is a representation of a national holiday or national week-long what started out as a week-long celebration is now an entire month of free financial literacy and educational seminars and workshops for people in the Houston and the Gulf Coast region. Now, the partners meeting is open to the public, so you ask yourself, well, who are the partners that we work with? Well, that's a great question. We work with nonprofits in the local Houston area, for-profits, banks doing community reinvestment, local city and government, schools, universities, that's all the way from elementary school in HISD all the way up to upper ed in U of H, A&M, Houston community colleges. Almost all of the universities, now that I think about it, are involved in some way in the month of April. So a couple different ways. If you want to join us and help with Houston Money Week, you're welcome to come to that event. It is open. But then you also are able to host events at your employer or your place of business as well. So I'd encourage people to go to www.houstonmoneyweek.org. As we get closer to April, you will see a calendar that is a dynamic calendar. We will add events and you can even put your zip code in there and it will point you to the closest educational event that is in your zip code, but you can also do it by subject. So let's say you wanted some help with tax preparation. A lot of our nonprofit groups are part of the VITA program here in Houston. So if you're low, moderate income, they will actually do your tax preparation for you. All of that you can find through HoustonMoneyWeek.org. With that, one more event we've got on the 22nd. I will be hosting a retirement income talk at the Youngman Library that's off of Westheimer. That is going to be a Saturday morning. It is open. It's free and open to the public. It starts at 10:15 and it will go to noon. What is unique about this one is that most of the seminars that I have been doing have been, they're always free and open to the public, but they have been focused on TRS, Teacher Retirement System, Texas Retirement System, State Pension, or ORP, Optional Retirement Program. So this one does have a component of that, but it is more general and it is open to the public. So we're trying to get people who have questions about Social Security, Medicare, things that should be on your radar right before retirement or leading up to retirement, getting more of a broad approach to that. You can reach out to, actually that's, I think the Facebook website for Houston First Financial Group has an invite to that, so you can click on that. With that, let's go ahead and get Kira on the line here, so we'll maximize our time here. Kira, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Chris. Thank you. This
Excellent.
is great. I appreciated hearing about all these programs that you've got going on. Makes me want to move to Houston.
We have a lot of stuff going on here, and we're not even in April yet. I mean, we're just leading up to it. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today. I always kind of share just a little bit with my listeners about you so that they can get to know you a little bit better. Now, are you the owner or a partner with Harmony Strategies?
Yeah, I'm the owner and director. I had pulled together this collective of mediators because in mediation we all have these social emotional skills development, that really practical skills that we all embrace and practice. And these are really, really important conflict resolution skills that are helpful for all leaders, really, in all different contexts. So leaders could be defined as teachers and administrators in schools. Leaders can be executives and managers. Leaders can even be parents who are, leading the next generation. So we feel like all these social emotional skills are so helpful for managers and leaders of all sorts. So I pulled this collective together so we can bring our skills to those leaders in workshops, training, consulting, and coaching capacities so that everyone can benefit from mediation skills.
Absolutely. So I love that. A lot of the companies that we work with financial education, there's a tie-in with human resources and training development and financial wellness as well as health and wellness. And so I like that conversation. Now, you when you got in contact with me, you had kind of a unique approach because we talk about people's relationships to money, but you deal with the mediation and conflict resolution with people when they're facing crisis or death of loved ones and that kind of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, there's two different things that we can start with. First of all, in mediation, in particular, I've been working in small claims court for bunch of months now, and it's very interesting that they'll come to small claims ostensibly to sue someone for some small amount, but it's usually not about the money. It's about some sort of relationship. It's about something emotional. So just as an example, we had a case where it was a veterinary agency, a hospital, and unfortunately a dog had passed, and this woman was so distraught. But what was she suing for? She wanted this money, but the money was not going to bring her dog back, and she knew that. What she was upset about was she wanted an apology. And money was a symbolic apology for her. But once we unpacked what had happened, we realized that even a verbal apology, a sincere verbal apology, was really all it took. So there really is that deep emotional component to money. And we see that all the time as mediators. People use money as a tool to fill their emotional needs. So first of all, there's that whole conversation around what money means emotionally to people. And when you have someone in crisis, that brings it to a deeper level, a much more meaningful level, when money is really a situation of potentially life or death, when you need funds for your medical expenses, or you may lose your house, when there's serious unemployment and money is so scarce, that's when emotions can get really intense. And what happens is, for people who face these crises, we tend to relate to money, certainly when we're in the crisis, very differently than, I want to say, normatively we relate to money. So in human history, I don't know if you've read the book or you're familiar with the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. It's getting a lot of attention lately.
I have not read it, but it is on my list. And I'm putting a star next to it now that you mentioned it. So.
Yeah. So fabulous book. And he has a whole chapter on currency and exchange and money. And it really brings out what money means. And it definitely sheds light on how money is related to emotions. Because through the millennia, as human beings evolved, there was no currency exchange, right? In other words, people were just out in the jungle, out in the savannas, trying to just feed themselves and keep themselves alive, frankly. And there was a lot of loss. There was a lot of fear that was day to day. Nobody really got to age, I want to say even 10, without experiencing some serious crisis, emergency, or loss. And then fast forward, we had the evolution that created empires. And empires then developed a common story, a common language. So suddenly humans had exchanges. We had currency, and those currency were related to a message, a language. So, for example, fast forward to today. If I have $10 in my wallet, Chris, you and I have never actually met in person. There's very little that you know about me and I know about you, but we both have this common language. We both understand what $10 means. $10 has a certain value that we both can understand and appreciate. So if I tell you I've got $10, you would very quickly understand that I can't buy a house with that, but I can buy a meal with that. So there's this common language that we have around money. But what happens when there's a crisis? And I call this like the option B situation around Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant's book, Option B. When people face a crisis, because money is this language and it's very involved with our emotions, we end up relating to money differently than what has become normative in our society. So the norm in our society is people don't experience a lot of loss and emergencies, especially over, I want to say, the last 100 to 200 years, where medicine has come so far, and there's been so many, I want to say, nonprofit and governmental pushes to support people, that you kind of assume you're going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. You don't assume there's going to be a crisis or emergency. So when you speak with most financial planners, and I don't know your practice in particular, Chris, so I don't know if this is how you work your business or not, but it's okay. Most financial planners are not talking about what you do when you are facing a crisis or emergency. Most financial planners are somewhat struck with what you should do with your money then. So let's say I have a pot of $50,000 and I'm about to lose my house. If I turn to a financial planner, that person may not be able to really guide me so much in whether I should rent or whether I should move in with relatives, or what I really should be doing if I've got $50,000 to my name and I'm about to lose my house. Usually, when we relate to financial planning, we're planning for retirement, or we're planning for accumulating wealth. We're assuming best case scenario, because most of the time for most people nowadays, we can go through life reasonably assuming we're not going to have a crisis. Crisis has become the exception. So in contrast with where we had been as human beings through the millennia, where crises happened all the time, people had loss all the time, sickness happened all the time, nowadays, that's actually the exception, not the rule. So those of us who face a crisis are suddenly marginalized, and we can't relate to a whole host of things in a normative way, including our relationship to money. So how does that play out? Well, I'll share in my personal situation. I have a personal relationship to this as well. In other words, I face this professionally as a mediator. And also, on a personal level, I'm also in that option B because I have a son who was diagnosed with tumors when he was 15 months old. Well, all of a sudden, all this money that we had maybe set aside for a vacation or for having our children do extracurricular activities, music lessons, or whatever the case may be, all of a sudden we had a massive, massive strike with what do? We have to radically shift our perspective, and we need to have a very more short-term focus. So instead of saving up and thinking about our upcoming Hawaiian vacation, we now had to worry about how do we get from today to tomorrow with everyone okay.
Right.
We were dealing with survival all of a sudden. So said differently, when we talk about financial planning, we talk about how we can thrive, how we can not only be solvent, but we can be, I want to say, impactful, and we can really make a mark with what we have financially. You know, that we come to a place where we're really thriving based on saving and setting aside and being mindful of our money. But there's no amount of saving and there's no amount of mindfulness that will prepare you for a crisis or emergency, because that's by definition what happens. A crisis and emergency is not something you ever plan for. It's something that it's sudden and unknown and scary and unpredictable. So there's no means of adequately planning for it. I mean, the closest we have, I'd say, is insurance. Insurance systems are our best way of planning, but those are very imperfect. There are still deductibles, and there are still the unknowns of, if you have home insurance, homeowners insurance, but all of a sudden there's a flood and you realize that there was a flood carve out, that there was no flood coverage. And we don't think about our insurance needs because, again, these are the exceptions to the rule. We're not thinking it'll happen to us. We think this will happen to somebody else. This is, this is the them. There's actually a great book called Wednesdays Were Pretty Normal, or Wednesdays Were Almost Normal. There was a man who also had a child who was diagnosed with cancer, and he writes about all of a sudden, within a matter of moments, he and his family became those people. The people who all of a sudden were in and out of chemotherapy treatments. The people who had lost their house. The people who were unemployed. The people who were, in whatever shape or form, the charity cases. And that's where money just, again, it has a very strong emotional component, because we don't plan for if we might be the charity cases. That's just not something that we have conversations around. Most parents are not sitting with their kids around the dinner table and saying, now listen, if you are ever homeless, this is what you should do. They may have a conversation with their children saying, if you are ever extremely wealthy, this is where you may want to donate your money. Or if you're, this is where we want to have vacations. But we don't have conversations around, if you lose everything, where should you go?
Right.
So what ends up being is those who do face these crises, those who are in these option B situations, like I said, are marginalized. We become those people, the people who are charity cases, and it also affects our financial life in that we suddenly have to take all that money for the rainy day and realize this is the rainy day. And we didn't predict that was going to happen. Nobody prepared us for, no, it's not about retirement. It's about now. Now is the rainy day. And there's very few people to turn to for how to handle that emotionally and practically. So what do you do? Because you never know if there's going to be another rainy day ahead, of course. And once you're in that scenario where the world has just turned upside down, Well, now you realize, oh my gosh, the world can turn upside down. So you kind of have this balance of, okay, so do I use my money now, or shouldn't I be setting some aside because it could get worse, which it could. What I have found generally happens is people embrace the idea of working moment to moment, day to day, in a different way than we had before. So rather than thinking about saving up for a vacation in the future, and frankly, rather than even thinking about retirement, we're thinking about how can I make the most of my day-to-day, of my day-to-day, meaning of the now, with my friends and family and people who are important to me right now. So I'll share with you just another little story, for example, about how that plays out. I have a friend who unfortunately lost her husband to cancer at a relatively young age. He was in his low 50s. And she turned to me at some point because, again, she had known that we had faced our own crisis and our own tumor story. And she said, Kira, you know how much money he saved for retirement that he is never going to see? And it gives you the chills to think, wow, this man was so responsible. He did everything right. But life just sent him this curveball. So her takeaway was similar to my takeaway, which is, you know what? We have to rethink how much we put away and how much we just enjoy in the now. And again, it's I want to say minority conversation, meaning this is not what most people think about. Most people are not talking this contrarian viewpoint of, hey, if you've got $10, don't put it away. Use it now. Enjoy it now, because tomorrow may not come. And most people don't think that way. Most people don't process their financial picture that way. And there's a lot of validity to embracing and using what you have, because money, when it comes down to it, money is a means to an end. And we can be concerned that in the future we might need it as a means to an end, or we can use it now as a means to an end. And it's not objectively wrong or right, but when you have the situation of option B, when you have a crisis, you have a bit more perspective on what happens if I use my money now. What happens if I need my money now? And it's a different perspective, and it's a different take on the relationship to money than most people predict, or most people plan for, or most people are comfortable with. It is an uncomfortable conversation to have. And that's why most people don't have it unless they're somehow just thrust into this situation. We don't, like I said, we don't have these conversations of, hey, if the worst situation hits, here's what you're going to do, kid. Nobody, not nobody, but we don't really reasonably assume that, and we don't want to build towards that. We want to build towards the best case scenario. We want to build towards how we can thrive.
So I love you talked about a bunch of stuff here. So let me kind of break some of down or back. I made lots of notes here. So
great, okay.
Because this is a great conversation to have. The first, as you were saying this, the first thing that popped into my head was a particular client. That as a financial advisor, people think of investments. And then if you're doing a good job doing financial planning, maybe you're dealing with, what would happen in the event that somebody passed away, became disabled, or had to enter into long-term care. You mentioned a little bit about insurance, and that's in that realm. But by its very definition, crisis is something that hasn't been put into that plan. And so this was a particular client that I tried to follow up with, hadn't heard from them in a while. Turns out that they had lost their house during a hurricane. And so the investment piece was not as big an issue anymore.
Right.
It was when you mentioned dealing with things day to day, that it becomes more of a survival as opposed to that thrive. You made two really good book recommendations. You talked about Option B, which I had not heard of. I heard of Leaned In, but I had not heard of this, and so I made a note on that. And then also the book Sapiens. So this is excellent information that you're talking about. I kind of wanted to shift a little bit because we've got not that much. We've got about 6 minutes left, but I also wanted to talk about conflict resolution in the workplace. So that may be almost a different show altogether, but that's something that you deal with on a daily or monthly basis as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Like you said, that might be a whole other show.
In the next 6 minutes. No.
Yeah. Well, listen, businesses are set to be as profitable as possible. That's what they're about, right? And this is where, of course, it plays into money. Businesses are supposed to be making money and generating wealth for the investors, for the owners, that are involved. And what happens is, how does conflict resolution play into place is people often underestimate human capital and the value of the people involved in their businesses. So the way that we help as mediators is we help focus on how do you develop your talent? How do you work with the people on your team so that they can have maximum impact, and it affects the bottom line. It really does. If you get a manager who has just a hostile manner and is very hyper-competitive and is not looking out for the folks on his team, then people have a low morale and their productivity will wane. So we work with all kinds of managers and executives on how to have those people skills that will build their team so that profitability, because of productivity, will be at maximum. And also how to foster innovation through that. See, when people feel like there's too much of a competitive environment at work, then they're not going to be innovative. They're not going to go on a limb to bring up an interesting new idea, an interesting new way that things could run more efficiently. They're going to be silenced. And it's a shame because people have fabulous different perspectives on teams that can really be fleshed out and can benefit everyone when voices are heard. So a lot of our conflict resolution is really about when there is shaming or silencing or the teams are just breaking each other down. What do you do about that? How do you reframe this? How do you get those skills so that people can come together and really trust and grow together? And when you grow emotionally, you grow practically. The money comes when the people are happy. Bottom line.
I think we've all been somewhere where we witnessed both of those. We've seen teams at their most efficient and creative when people are able to go out on a limb and put those good ideas out there. We've also seen those authoritarian group leaders where you don't feel like you can do that. You mentioned shaming, and so how are companies open? We've got just a few more minutes here, but are companies open to that when you go in and you teach these the teams or the leaders these skills? Are they open to that?
Well, as a lump, I can't say everyone is open to that. No. You'll often get some personalities, some folks who are more open than others. Some people you win over time, and some people you realize, it's just going to be up to senior management how to handle that. And sometimes it's a shame, but you see companies that fold because senior management just couldn't work it out and couldn't figure out how to handle their people. And this happens especially with small companies and startups, by the way. I got one woman on my team who was involved with helping out a startup, and the gentleman who was in charge, he just had a real toxic personality, and he had a great idea. And it was a tech company, and the technology was there. But he could not, bring himself to understand humility enough to work with his team. It had to be all about him. It had to be he was all great and everybody else was to blame for anything that wasn't working well. And unfortunately, the company just went belly up.
How'd that work out for him?
What's that?
I said, how'd that work out for him? Not very well.
Yeah, no, it didn't. It didn't. And so, like I said, so sometimes people are not open to it, but...
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.